My name's Garrett Epple. You're listening to Pro Lacrosse Talk.
Tom Schreiber.
Sidearm whip. Scores.
Now in front. Pannell scores. Paul Rabel splits two and scores.
Kylie O'Miller showing off those shifty skills.
Kelly, not shy, bounces one home. What a start.
Welcome to Pro Lacrosse Talk, the voice of Pro Lacrosse. I'm Hutton, he's Adam, and together we're bringing you interviews with your favorite players and coaches, as well as news from all 4 professional lacrosse leagues. We are stoked to have you guys for another episode of Pro Lacrosse Talk. Today we are talking all things PLL offseason, including our first coaching change and possible expansion. Before we dive into that, Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Honestly, the offseason in most sports is some of the most exciting times in leagues, especially like the NBA. So I'm excited to see what this offseason brings, particularly for the PLL.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, speaking of juicy news, we already have our first coaching change. Coach Dom Starsia is out as the Chrome head coach. He'll be moving to a PLL advisory role. He'll join the board. So we have our first coaching vacancy in this offseason, and, it kind of starts off with a bang. But what are some guys that you think would be a good fit to replace Coach Starsia with the Chrome, Adam?
There are a couple names that I've been contemplating for this since I heard the announcement. There's a bunch of different routes the league could go when it comes to this position. We see someone like Nat St. Laurent with the Redwoods, who is still currently coaching at Ohio Northern, and then the rest of the coaching staff isn't coaching out. So I'm curious to see where they'll go with this, whether they go to maybe a college coach currently, or if someone that has had some pro experience, which leads to a few of my names, whether that's Bear Davis, former Ohio Machine head coach, who we've had on the pod before and talked about his experience with them, or Brian Reese, who used to be head coach of the Bayhawks, has strong roots in that area and around professional lacrosse, and now is a volunteer assistant at the University of Maryland, where his wife is the women's head coach. Those two names are two that kind of on the top of my mind, but that doesn't mean to say that there aren't a ton of candidates that we're not even thinking about. Maybe current coaches in positions that, after seeing a year of the PLL, might be enticed to kind of make that next step and go to the professional league or move leagues even potentially.
We're at an interesting spot because it's still more desirable in this lacrosse atmosphere to be a college coach in some of these premier college programs. When I came up with my list of candidates, I think Bear Davis and Brian Reese are great candidates to have on there, but I was kind of, focused on guys like Bear Davis and Brian Reese that, are maybe have an opening. I didn't really look at any of these college coaches. We could talk about a guy, who's had plenty of professional lacrosse experience like a Paul Cantabine, but he's, set at Stevenson. I don't see him leaving. I don't see a lot of these guys leaving their college programs. So there's a guy, though, out there who just left the Naval Academy, and Rick Soule. I think he'd make a good candidate. He's got a lot of experience, with different programs. He was Stony Brook prior to his time at Navy. He's looking for a coaching gig. Maybe the PLL is a good spot for him. It would add a little bit of diversity into the coaching pool, and, I think he'd be a good fit maybe for the PLL. But I wouldn't be surprised, too, if maybe they look more in-house. Maybe they look at a guy like Tony Resch, who did outstanding things for the PLL Archers defense this year as an assistant. He had the Archers, it was the top-ranked defense, which boasted the lowest scoring against average with 10.5 points per game in the regular season, and they held teams to single-digit games 5 different times. He's actually my top pick to take over the Chrome. I think he would do wonders in transforming their defense. He's already got plenty of head coaching experience at the pro level. He won 4 NL titles with the Philadelphia Wings and 2 MLL titles with the Philadelphia Barrage. So I think it's a no-brainer if they decide to go in-house. Another guy in-house would be Dom Marzano, who's an assistant with the Redwoods with Nat St. Laurent. So he's another guy. And my other hot take is maybe we see a former player take the reins. Matt Danowski is 34 years old right now. Could we see him maybe, retire and take over as head coach? I don't want to force Matt Danowski into early retirement. He's obviously showed he's got some good lacrosse left in the tank still, but I think him coaching a bunch of Duke alumni would be a match made in heaven. He's an assistant under his father at Duke right now, helps out there. So I think seeing him take over as a head coach, as you know, would be the youngest head coach in the PLL right now, would be an interesting dynamic. So a lot of great names out there. It's tough to speculate for guys that would leave their college programs. So that's why these guys that I mentioned are mostly either in the PLL or, as you mentioned, looking for coaching jobs right now. But it's an interesting dynamic. It's not to say that a college coach, even a head coach, can't be a PLL coach since the seasons don't overlap necessarily. But I just think with recruiting, it'd be a lot for one person's plate. Obviously Nat St. Laurent does it. And Coach Stagnina's done it when he was coaching the MLL. But it's a little bit different, especially with the travel. So I don't really see it happening. I see them maybe looking for a full-time guy. But there's some other news too, Adam, that was just recently kind of hinted at. I wouldn't say announced, but the PLL just tweeted out who wants us to expand in 2020. And, to me and you, that definitely means they're expanding. I mean, I think it's 95% chance now. Whether that's a good idea or not is another discussion. But, what were your thoughts when you saw this tweet that came out on Tuesday?
Yeah, no, it was super exciting. I think we saw a large number of players that were picked up from the player pool make a big impact in the league this year, and I don't see why there couldn't be the opportunity to bring in a team or two to create more competition between teams. I think there are awesome opportunities for players that are leaving. We've already talked about in previous pods about the great opportunities when it comes to this current draft class that we'll have to fill some rosters. So there's definitely going to be some moving and shaking when it comes to these rosters this off season. So I don't see why not. And I think some people are maybe saying wait another year or two to see how things go. Some people say the rivalries are created. I don't see why we can't expand more, create more rivalries, create more opportunities for a big weekend. This past summer we had 2 games on one day usually and 1 game on the next. Why can't we have 2 days full of lacrosse, with 2 games on each day, depending on how many teams they add. So I'm super excited to see the opportunities that will arise for players, whether they're currently in the MLL or PLL or the collegiate side if they do decide to expand.
I'm excited. I mean, you mentioned there's a deep draft class, so I think, finding enough players would be fine. They'd have to essentially find 50 more players, but like you said, there's a lot of people in the player pool. We both tend to think that more MLL players are going to come over to the PLL than vice versa. But I don't know. I'm excited. Like, as a fan, I think it would be great, but I am a little, cautiously optimistic with it because I want to know, is money going to be an issue with that? You have to pay 50 more players and 6 more coaches, essentially, 2 head coaches and 4 assistants.
I understand that, but I also harken back to Paul and Mike's initial interview about the league and the finances of this league and how they talked about their 10-year plan, right? That has to be part of the 10-year plan. The fact that there is opportunities for growth. Everything has been so strategic and systematic with this league. Not to say they aren't taking into account what the fans say. Paul talked about today that it's super important and they listen to all the fans. So we may have a deciding factor when it comes to if they do decide to expand or not. But this has to be a part of their plan going forward. This has been in the works, I'm sure, for a while now.
Absolutely. I just am wondering, is it a little too soon? You got 1 year under your belt. Maybe you wait 1 or 2 years. I mean, I'm excited. If they announce there's 2 teams, I'll be the first guy to, get excited about it. But, I do go in with a little bit of some timidness with this news. But, we're both excited. Like we said, we have ideas for names that we've had in our article. I mean, I really like the Marauders are a name that I really like, because you could call them the Maraude Squad. The Altitude is another name I came up with. I don't know if you had some names other than, I know you like the Breakers, and a Surge was another name we kind of thought was kind of cool. But, it'd be cool to kind of introduce some more color schemes, some different logos. That stuff is exciting, as fans, and that's a way to pique our interest in this offseason.
I don't know if I have any ideas for names, but what kind of might lead into what we want to talk about next with this PLL offseason, I'm just super excited to see, or intrigued at least, by how the roster makeups will be created for these programs. Is there going to be the opportunity for teams to protect a certain amount of players from each roster and then have an expansion draft based off of that like they do in the NHL? So that's something I'm thinking about. Are they going to have automatically, because we clearly already know if they do expand, they're probably not going to get that first overall pick, right? Because we had the whole thing about this draft bracket this past summer was that the winner of the one side would get that first overall pick. So do they get the second pick? So is that drop when you lose that number one pick game drop to 3? There's just so many questions I have, and the league's working through these things too, I'm sure, at the same time. So maybe they do get that first pick, or maybe they get the first pick in every other round. I'm just super curious to see how the roster makeups of these teams are created, if it's one or if it's two. Most leagues usually bring in more than one franchise when they do expand in a given year. It'll be interesting to see what that player movement is like. Are these rosters going to be very similar to last year? They're going to be big shakeups. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, no, and I think another thing we don't really know about too is, you mentioned, are these teams going to be able to protect players? Honestly, the competition committee could go in and decide, hey, we're going to, build 2 more teams, and we're going to take players from these coaches without even telling them. The coaches actually came in without building the rosters themselves, so how much more say are the coaches going to have in year 2? I'd like them, as the GMs of the team as well, I'd like them to be able to, say we're going to keep these guys and these other guys are unprotected, and you can then build these 2 teams from that. But the competition committee could come in and kind of do whatever they want, and I don't think that'd be the smart thing to do, but they are a single entity league, so that is something that they could do, which is, also interesting. And, maybe we see some big names come over. We're going to talk about that after the break, and maybe they build them off of that. But with that, let's take our quick break, and then we'll get into some NLL transactions with our quick stick, and then our wish list of what we want to see from this offseason. Today's show is being brought to you in part by Stitcher Premium. You can use Stitcher Premium to listen to shows ad-free such as Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, My Favorite Murder, Wolverine the Lost Trail, or our favorite, The Fantasy Footballers. For only $4.99 a month or $34.99 a year, you get access to Stitcher Originals, bonus episodes, and comedy albums. Better yet, if you go over to Stitcher.com/premium and use the promo code LACROSSE today, you can get 1 month free. So head on over to Stitcher, sign up, and get your free trial today. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast. We've been using Anchor for our podcast since the very start. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place, and better yet, it's free. They allow you to easily record and edit your podcast so it sounds great and send it out to all the major networks such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and many more. Better yet, they connect you with advertisers so you can start making money from your podcast right away. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, download the Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, so welcome back. We're going to go into our quick stick where we'll just read some NLL transactions from this week. Since the NLL is undergoing their off-season right now, they're getting ready for the season to start, but there are a lot of big name signings. So let's just start off with it. The Buffalo Bandits have signed Tyler Halls to a 2-year agreement. The Halifax Thunderbirds have signed Trevor Smith and Clay Scanlon to 1-year agreements. The New England Black Wolves have signed Andrew Q, who was recently on our podcast, and Chris Young to 1-year agreements. The Rochester Nighthawks have signed Rylan Reese to a 2-year agreement, and the Vancouver Warriors have signed Mitch Jones to a 2-year agreement. So those are your transactions from this week in the NLL, and that kind of segues nice into our conversation about some things we'd like to see this offseason and, from the PLL going forward is it possible for us to know these contract details? I mean, if not money, at least let us know how many years some of these guys are signed up. Maybe they're all on the same initial deal. Maybe it's 2 or 3 years or whatever. But, we should know how long these guys are supposed to be with the team, and whether it's signed with a team or signed with a league, since the league is a single entity, it might be that they have a general PLL contract. But that stuff, we kind of want to know. I mean, what are your thoughts, Adam, on knowing more about the contracts?
Yeah, I think it's something that creates fan fodder, right? We always go in to see what the contracts look like for various teams, whether they're leagues like the MLB, who doesn't have a salary cap, or like the NHL, NBA that has salary caps. And it's super fun to create the opportunities to see what free agency looks like in leagues, to see where the player movement's going to be. So I'd love to see what the different contracts look like for the players. And you know what? It creates transparency, I think. And the league has been very transparent so far about how they do things. They've been systematic in how they drop information, but very transparent once that information's out. And I'm curious to see what happens here. If that information is dropped, will we see an increase potentially in the salaries of MLL players like we did this year, which was a positive. So I'm curious to see what those contracts look like, just based off of what we know for contracts in the past. If this is going to be a league that says it's for the players, by the players, and this can be their full-time job, are they getting full-time salaries?
Yeah, no, we know the minimum is 20,000, but that's not huge actually, especially for professional sports. So that is something we would like to know, and I just am looking forward to the day where we can value people on money. Obviously they're people, they're athletes behind it, but I want to know if Tom Schreiber has a bigger deal than a Matt Rambo. I want to have a discussion about it. Is Matt Rambo worth more money than Tom Schreiber? And it kind of puts the power back into the players' hands too with these contracts. And I don't think we're there yet. I think it's more years down the road, but that's where other professional sports are. So that's one of the things on my wish list as well. And kind of then player movement, and how are these players that are going to join the league being signed on? Again, this kind of goes along with the contracts, but you and me both think that there are going to be some MLL players joining the PLL next year. That's a given. And you might see some PLL join the MLL as well. I don't think it's as much. I think, if we want to talk about the MLL, I could tell you that definitely people that are staying, I think, would be a Steele Stanwick or a Colin Heacock, hometown guys like that. You probably got a Dylan Malloy staying in Long Island with the Lizards, after he chose to join the MLL. He was initially in the PLL player pool. And then a Max Adler, who's spoken on our podcast how he feels a commitment to the Denver Outlaws. And maybe you'll see like a Shaq Stanwick join the MLL. He sat in the player pool and didn't end up suiting up for any of the teams. Maybe an Alex Reddy who suited up one game for the Chrome. Because the goalie situation I think is interesting in the PLL. It's almost like you have a lot of talent at the goalie position, but again, you can't start all of them. So maybe you see some more goalies switching to the MLL. Or I think another thing is, a big question is, what are these traditional box players doing? You saw Wes Berg, he got some more time as the season went along, but he didn't get as much time as, say, a guy who's another box guy like a Randy Stotts, Mark Matthews, Zach Curry, or Kyle Jackson. These were all stars on their respective rosters in the MLL, and I think a lot of these guys who are box lacrosse players first and field lacrosse players second use the field game to kind of, refine their skills in the off season. And if they were to make the jump to the PLL, they probably wouldn't see as much playing time. I think a guy like Lyle Thompson is going to start no matter what. And same with like a Zach Currier. But, Mark Matthews or a Kyle Jackson, they'll play in the PLL, but are they going to, suit up every week? It's be a little bit more competition there. So I don't know. That's maybe more an advantage to staying in the MLL right now, is that ability to kind of, play more. And, you saw Andrew Q took advantage of that. A guy like Warren Jeffrey, another rookie, took advantage of that. Rylan Reese, the number 2 overall pick in the NLL, made big strides with the Cannons. So, I think maybe you see more traditional box lacrosse players stay in the MLL. But, I mentioned a big one already, Lyle Thompson, who is another guy you think is going to jump from the MLL to the PLL once their contracts are up.
Yeah, you mentioned Zach Curry, but Rob Pannell is someone that I obviously see making that jump. You saw the longer contracts for Lyle and Rob, and would they have made the jump prior to this year? Lyle's brothers and family are in the PLL already, and I can see Rob being a big star in the PLL like he has been in the MLL for years. He's one of the top players in the world, obviously, and I don't see why he can't be on that stage in the PLL being a headliner. Is it for that expansion franchise, or is it for a team looking for a superstar? So that's someone I can see definitely making the jump. But it's so frustrating but exciting at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it gives us something to talk about, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, but it gives us stuff to talk about, which is what we want and what's great about this offseason. For the first time in summer lacrosse history, we're talking about who's going to go with which league. It's kind of like harkens back to the NFL days, when you had a guy like Joe Namath who decided to play for the AFL as opposed to the NFL, which was considered the superior league at the time. So, we're kind of getting to see that in lacrosse. And I'm a guy who thinks that Rob Pannell is going to make the jump, and it's fun to speculate. And yeah, like you said, maybe they do join these expansion franchises.
Yeah, it's just super exciting to see. We'll obviously have tons of content once news drops over the next couple of months from both MLL and PLL moves. So I'm super excited to see what this offseason is going to bring.
Yep, me as well. But that wraps up our PLL offseason wish list, and our podcast for this week. We just want to tease going forward. We have an interview with Connor Busick coming up, as well as CJ Costabile with the Bayhawks. So those are two guys that, we've been looking forward to having on for a while now, and we finally got to interview them. So those will be our off-season interviews coming up soon. A lot of great content on our web. We mentioned our coaches' picks. That article is also on our website. You can kind of read a little bit more of my thoughts on why these guys should be considered for the Chrome head coaching job. But that wraps up episode 33. We thank you guys all for listening. We hope you tune in next time to Pro Lacrosse Talk.